there's one thing I think we can all agree on, it's that takeout is literally keeping us sane during quarantine. I mean, nobody wants to cook every day, nobody wants to clean up every day, and since we can't go to the restaurants, well, takeout is our best option. So today, let's talk about the history of takeout. Takeout has been around basically as long as human civilization has existed. Almost every culture and every location has had some different form of food that you could buy on the go or take back home. In ancient Rome, they had fast food counters called thermopolia. Now, these were essentially long bars that had holes cut inside where the food would be kept warm. They served things like lentils and cheese and fish and wine. Ancient Aztec markets featured a variety of tamale vendors for people who wanted to pick up their tamales and take them on the go. And butchers in 14th century Paris would take their food directly to the homes of their wealthiest customers. But the idea of getting entire meals pre-cooked from a restaurant really took off around the colonial period. At that point, many hotels featured restaurants that would cook for their guests, similar to what we know today. During the 18th century, hotels in major urban areas began to advertise that families in the region could buy a plate of whatever meal was being cooked that day by sending in their servants to pick them up. Later, after the Civil War, those same hotels and restaurants began to package up lunches in cracker boxes. Now, these made it easier not just for travelers who were moving through, but also people who wanted to take these lunches out for a picnic. They frequently featured sandwiches, salads, and sometimes even ice cream. It was also around this time that a group called the Dabawala in India began to deliver home-cooked lunches to hungry workers around Dubai. And the rise of the working class had a huge impact on the way food was served. After all, they were no longer working in and around the home where they could make their own lunches. Now they were going into factories, warehouses, and big urban centers where they would need to purchase lunch instead, or have something that they could pack from home and bring along with them. This led to the rise of food counters and takeaways, particularly in urban centers like New York. And in those same centers, some of the most popular foods were seafoods, like chowders and stews made from oysters and scallops and clams. These were filling dishes and they were pretty cheap. Customers could also buy extra oysters to take home for later in the evening, and the way they transported those oysters might look rather familiar. When you see these things, you probably think of Chinese food, but they're actually called oyster pails. Now, this is a holdover from their original purpose of being used to take home oysters and other shellfish after eating out. The first oyster pail business was started by the Bloomer brothers in 1900 in New York. They changed their name in the 1960s and again in the 1970s, but they're still the company that produces the majority of takeout containers today. Fold pack. Over the years, the oyster pail has evolved from the plain white box to the one you know today that's decorated with red designs, typically pagodas, and frequently Chinese characters. That's not a coincidence. That was done to coincide with the rise of Chinese takeout in America. The trend started in 1922 when a Los Angeles restaurant called the Kin Chu Cafe began to advertise that it was the only restaurant on the West Coast serving and delivering authentic Chinese food. Customers could call the restaurant directly and they would get hot food delivered to their door even as late as 1 a.m. The next big breakthrough came just 9 years after that with the first drive-thru restaurant, fabulously titled Pig Stand Number 21. It's a heck of a title, right? Like, I want to go there. I mean, why would you want to go to, like, Jim's Barbecue when you could be going to Pig Stand Number 21? Branding. But the invention that might have had the biggest impact on takeout actually didn't have anything to do with food. Television. After World War II, television exploded in America, and more people decided that they wanted to spend the free time that they had in the evenings sitting in front of TV. This meant that they weren't going out to eat as frequently, and restaurants across the country saw their profits decline. However, many restaurants came up with a rather clever solution. They began to print television menus, which were menus that were designed to be taken back home, as opposed to the menus that were supposed to stay in the restaurant. They specified that any dish on the menu could be ordered to be taken out. One study in the early 1950s found that restaurants who introduced the television menu saw their profits increase anywhere from 20 to 50%. So we've got takeout Chinese food, and we've got delivery, and we've got the basic sandwiches and salads, but I know what you're thinking. Where's the one food that everybody most closely associates with delivery? Yeah, pizza! In the mid-20th century, pizza was a brand new food for most Americans. The GIs had experienced it when they fought overseas in Europe during World War II, and when they came back, they told their friends and families and wives about it. This sparked a nationwide craze. The New York Times even wrote an article explaining what pizza was for people who are curious, calling it a pie made from yeast dough with any number of fillings, all of which contained tomatoes. By 1944, New York had already established itself as the pizza capital of America, with tons of restaurants that allowed you to carry out hot, fresh pizza and take it back home. But when it comes to delivery, once again, Los Angeles is first. An LA pizza joint called Casa de More is largely thought to be the first pizza joint to offer free pizza delivery, as long as you met the minimum cost. We owe them so much. Pizza is still one of our favorite foods, and today, 1 in 8 Americans will be eating pizza on any given day. Takeout and delivery became so popular that by the 1960s, it was the fastest growing segment of the American restaurant market. And of course, the next innovation came in the 1990s with, say it with me, the internet. In 1997, several websites popped up that did nothing but list menus for local restaurants. This paved the way for websites like Seamless and Grubhub to come onto the scene over a decade later. Today, even people who prefer to cook get food delivered, with ready-to-cook options like Blue Apron. This has led to the growth of the food delivery tech industry, such as apps like DoorDash. In 2014, that tech sector was valued at over $1 billion. Now that's a lot to chew on.